authority. Percy was no less talkative the next time she and Will met. It was a chance meeting at the same donut shop. She walked in and sat down with her coffee as though Will should have been expecting her. He was happy to see her. He lowered his Sunday newspaper and smiled. There were pleasantries, and then she did what she did the first time. She divested herself of malignant psychic energy, as though he were her therapist or shaman. It was like an exorcism. She was returning from a visit to the hospital. That day, he learned Percy had no father. She had been created by her mother and her mother alone. She had no brothers and no sisters. Her mother, one of the first women to plow her way through the male-dominated Faculty of Medicine at the University of Toronto, had decided in her early 40s, after 10 years of medical practice and research, to produce an heir. Percy was heir to Dr. Irene Bluet's legacy of research and good standing in the fields of premenstrual stress and convict counseling. She was being groomed like a racehorse, and, in fact, her conception was not unlike that of a racehorse's. Her father, the stud, as Percy referred to him, had been selected from a genius sperm pool. Her mother had taken 18 months to make up her mind. She finally settled on the semen of a Russian physicist, whose name Percy did not know, as her mother felt that knowing her father, beyond his field, titles, awards, and general genetic makeup, was pointless. After all, Percy had her, a loving mother who devoted herself to her work and her daughter. What more could Percy want? Will also got an update on Mrs. Rubini. Percy had seen her that morning, and she had noticed that Mrs. Rubini had a look of grace, as though some secret had been given to her, and her alone. She had sat on the bed, already dressed with her hair back. Her face had looked younger. She'd had her hands folded on her lap, and she was rocking gently back and forth on the bed, humming a song to herself. Percy had stared through the small glass square in her door for a while before entering the room, wondering why Mrs. Rubini looked so good. Percy had asked Mrs. Rubini how she was. Mrs. Rubini had told her she was fine. Percy had brought her medicine, and she had put it down on the small stand beside the bed. As Percy had reached for the water and paper cup with Zolfax in it, the white smock she wore to signify her membership in the auspicious collective of healers, experimenters, and general practitioners, had pulled up at the sleeves, revealing her 2 scars, a half-dime each in width, running parallel with her forearms and an 1.5 inches long. It was the first time she had been so careless at the hospital as to allow her suicide attempt to be seen by a patient. Their eyes had locked for a long moment before Percy had broken the spell and spoke, an act which commands attention when you wear a lab smock in an institution. Dr. Singh had told Mrs. Rubini that she would be going home at the end of the week, so Mrs. Rubini smiled every morning, rocking on the bed as she washed down the pill. Mrs. Rubini had stopped rocking and looked at Percy. The smile on her face had shut down like a storefront at closing time. A thin sheen of perspiration glossed Percy's forehead. It was downhill from there. She had been slow and shaky standing up. She'd thought Mrs. Rubini was going to attempt to help her. Anger had welled in her. She'd composed herself and looked sternly but without malice at Mrs. Rubini. Her look had said, "I'm the boss here. I'm the one who helps patients who have lost their balance." Not a single word was passed. Percy had maintained her gaze on Mrs. Rubini and told her to get her breakfast. The cafeteria would be open in 15 minutes. She had told Mrs. Rubini she would stop by later to give her her second pill and to talk with her. She'd admonished Mrs. Rubini not to forget that her husband would be there in the afternoon. As Percy had walked down the hall, it had occurred to her that the anxiety she'd just felt was one of the biggest emotions she'd experienced in some time. And she'd wondered if fear and anxiety were a dream of sorts, a dream without pictures. When she was finished, she took her customary pause, sipped her coffee, and allowed Will to speak into the silence. None of this protocol had been explained to Will. He just intuited it. "Why did you try to kill yourself?" he asked. She stared at him for a few seconds, then started to cry. End of chapter.